Around here at Hardware Unboxed, our thermal paste just keeps getting lost. If only there was some place we could collect it all together. The Hardware Unboxed mug, now available at store.hardwareunboxed.com.
Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Yep. Yeah, we're doing it. We are reviewing another Radeon RX 5700 XT graphics card. So if you're going to complain about that down in the comment section below, probably save your keystrokes because there's a few more to come. And I figure we've reviewed this many, we might as well review them all. So that way you have all the data from one source using the same method covering pretty much all the cards. So it's happening. Anyway, in today's review, we have Asrock's flagship RX 5700 XT graphics card, the Taichi OC Plus. And I have to say, this thing is a bit of a visual overload. At quick glance, it's pretty hard to work out exactly what's going on here, and sort of at a closer inspection, still not quite sure. Still, I wouldn't say it's unattractive. It's just, yeah, it's very aggressive. It's very different, that's for sure. Slightly confusing design, I must say, but it'll probably appeal to a good many gamers. The fan shroud is of course plastic, and Asrock has incorporated a number of RGB lighting effects for those of you who enjoy your bling. There's lots of RGB. The centrally located fan is a transparent 80mm model that's designed to illuminate with the surrounding RGB ring, and I'll admit, it provides a pretty cool effect. Then either side of that we have a pair of 90mm fans, so a triple fan card and all fans spin in the same direction. In total, the card measures 324mm long, and that makes it longer than quite a few of the recently reviewed models, such as the MSI Gaming X version. It also stands 145mm tall and measures 53mm thick, making it another triple slot card. It's also reasonably heavy at 1230 grams, which isn't surprising given the dimensions. That said, it is 13% lighter than the MSI Gaming X, so it'll be interesting to see how much difference that makes when it comes to measuring thermal performance. Flipping the card over, we find, in my opinion, what is one of the best looking backplates I've ever seen. I get that aesthetics aren't super important, but damn, I think this thing does look pretty awesome. That said, I spoke to Tim and he's not as convinced, so obviously this is a personal opinion thing. But anyway, Asrock calls it their 3D metal backplate, and those embedded gears really do look incredible, again, in my opinion. But it's not just all about the looks, this thing is functional as well. Not only does it strengthen the card to help avoid bending the PCB due to the heavy cooler below, but it also acts as a large heat spreader, thanks to the inclusion of numerous thermal pads that connect to hotspots on the backside of the PCB. Moving on to the side of the card, we find a small RGB backlit section in the middle with a few gears and a Taichi logo. We also find some small switches either side of the RGB section. The switch to the left allows the user to switch between the OC and silent BIOS, while the switch to the right allows you to enable or disable the LED lighting. Then finally, at the end of the card, you'll find a pair of 8-pin PCIe power connectors. Before we take the card apart, let's talk about the I/O panel, as it is quite a bit different to every other 5700 XT we've looked at so far. Whereas all other models that we've seen so far included 3 DisplayPort 1.4a outputs and a single HDMI 1.2b output, the Taichi offers 4 DisplayPorts and 2 HDMI ports, allowing it to simultaneously support 6 displays. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, enough chit chat, time to pull this thing apart and see what it's made of. With the removal of 8 screws, the cooler can be taken off, and we'll start by looking at the cooler. With the fan shroud and then the fans removed, the heatsink weighs in at 600 grams, which is reasonably hefty, making it only slightly lighter than the 694 gram version used by the Red Devil, and quite a bit heavier than the 483 gram cooler of the Nitro Plus. The cooler also looks quite decent. The copper base plate is pretty basic, it's not nickel plated, but it should work well enough. It connects to 5 6mm heat pipes, which then move heat through 2 reasonably large banks of fins. There's also a fairly typical looking aluminium plate that connects to the VRM components. Where Asrock looks to have done a reasonable job is with the memory cooling. Here you'll find a full-size heat spreader that not only fully covers the GDDR6 memory, but basically the entire card, so this will further strengthen the PCB. I don't imagine it will be anywhere near as good as Sapphire's design when it comes to cooling, but it should be more than sufficient. Then over on the PCB, we find a 10+1 phase VRM, which has been upgraded from AMD's standard 7+1 design of the reference model. Asrock's using an international rectifier IR35217 controller and Vishay SIC 632 50A power stages. Overall, quite a solid looking graphics card, but now it's time to put it to the test. So let's see how the Taichi handles our 1 hour long F1 2019 stress test. Testing in a 21-degree room inside the Corsair Crystal 570X, fully populated with 120mm fans, the Taichi maxed out at 74 degrees, which honestly isn't that impressive as it makes it the hottest running AIB 5700 XT that we've seen to date. It's not a terrible result as it's only 3 degrees hotter than the Nitro Plus, but it's not a great result either. Making matters much worse in my opinion is the fact this temperature wasn't achieved with the fans spinning at a whisper quiet 1000 RPM, rather they spun at 2100 RPM, and you could certainly hear them at that speed. It wasn't exactly loud, but you could definitely hear the graphics card over the case fans. The VRM temperature was better at 70 degrees, that's the same temperature we saw from the Red Devil, and only 3 degrees hotter than the Nitro Plus, but it was 8 degrees hotter than MSI's Gaming X. The GDDR6 memory temperature was also pretty ordinary at 78 degrees, most models that we've seen so far maxed out at 76 degrees, while the Nitro Plus ran at just 72 degrees. Now, if the card overclocked to the artificial limits imposed by AMD, the card ran pretty bloody hot, peaking at 86 degrees, which is 18 degrees hotter than the MSI Gaming X once overclocked. The only good news here is that the fans weren't spinning at crazy high speeds, but even so, 2200 RPM isn't exactly slow. For example, the MSI Gaming X ran 18 degrees cooler with a fan speed of just 1400 RPM. Still, the card did maintain a clock speed of 2030 MHz, and the memory did reach the AMD limit of 950 MHz, and this did result in a reasonable performance uplift, which we'll look at now. As usual, we're testing with our Core i9 1900K GPU test rig. The CPU has been overclocked to 5 GHz, and we have 16GB of DDR4 3400 memory. The latest drivers available at the time of testing have been used, and for this one we have just a few select games to look at. Out of the box, the Taichi matched the performance of the Gaming X, though we're only talking about an extra frame over the Thick 2 and Red Devil. Then once overclocked, we get an extra frame, so pretty typical performance for a Radeon RX 5700 X2 graphics card in this title. Again, out of the box, we see strong performance in Forza Horizon 4, but this time we see a really nice 3% performance boost when overclocked. This is partly due to the GPU maintaining a higher frequency on the Taichi than it did on the Gaming X, and partly due to the 6% boost in memory frequency. Of course, a lot of this will depend on silicon quality, so I'm not saying all Taichi graphics cards will overclock better than the Gaming X versions. That certainly won't be the case. Finally, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and here the overclocked Taichi was able to edge out the stock RTX 2070 Super by providing a 5% performance boost over the out-of-the-box result. Again, when it came to FPS performance, the Taichi was solid, but we're only talking about a very small performance advantage, and as I said, it will be silicon dependent. Here we see one of the reasons why the Taichi runs a little on the hot side. GPU power draw is up 12% from the MSI Gaming X and even 4% higher than the Nitro Plus, which is another model that should run a little cooler than it does. Overclocked, the Taichi performed really well, but temperatures were way up, and we can see that's partly down to a further 6% increase in power draw. Now, when looking at total system draw, we again see the Taichi is a bit of a power-hungry graphics card, pushing total system power draw 5% higher than the other 5700 XTs tested. I'm not entirely sure why this card consumes so much more power, but it seems as though pushing a little higher out of the box has destroyed the efficiency of the 5700 XT. Basically, the MSI Gaming X has to be overclocked to its limits before it can match the power draw of the Taichi. And again, this is a real issue for the Taichi, especially when it comes to operating temperatures. Had Asrock just backed it off a little bit, I believe we'd be looking at similar temperatures to that of the Nitro Plus, or even the Red Devil. But as it stands, out of the box, the card will peak at 74 degrees when gaming, and if you want to maximize performance, you'll be pushing temperatures well over 80 degrees, so I don't really recommend doing that. The stock VRM temperature was reasonable, a peak of 70 degrees is perfectly fine, and even the 76 degrees of the Evoke OC and AMD's own reference design isn't really that bad. Ideally though, you would like to see results like what we got with the MSI Gaming X, but that's hardly necessary. And just a quick look at GDDR6 memory temperatures, they were a little less impressive as the Taichi crept towards 80 degrees out of the box, making it one of the hottest cards we've seen so far. But where the Taichi really disappoints is the operating volume. Running a little hot relative to other AIB graphics cards isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but running hotter while also making more noise is, and it's precisely what we see here. The Evoke OC didn't exactly impress me, and while the Taichi does run cooler for the most part, it makes just as much noise. At this point, it seems pretty clear that the Taichi OC Plus is just a bit too OC plussed for its own good, and the cooler just can't handle it. So I decided to see what a negative 10% power reduction would do, and I found some pretty interesting results. I also tried out the silent BIOS mode and also found some fairly promising results. For example, when playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we only see a 1 to 2 FPS reduction with the manual tuning and a 2 to 3 FPS reduction with the silent BIOS. So that means at most we're seeing a 4% reduction in performance, and apparently the silent mode reduces the power target by 17%, so you start to get a sense of just how inefficient the 5700 XT becomes when pushed to around 2 GHz. Both the manual tuning and silent BIOSes reduce the GPU operating temperature by 4 degrees and drop the fan speed by 100 RPM, for a very minor reduction in operating volume. Still, a 4-degree drop in temperature is rather significant, and this meant the Taichi was now able to match the Red Devil. Granted, the fans were still spinning around 600 RPM faster, but this is a much better result for Asrock. The VRM operating temperature was also reduced by 3 to 4 degrees, and this made the Taichi one of the cooler 5700 XT graphics cards that we've tested, though it's not quite as good as it appears to be, again given the fan speed is quite a bit higher than the Nitro Plus and Red Devil, but still not a terrible result. And just lastly, we have the GDDR6 memory temperature, and here we see just a 1 to 2 degree drop, but still that places the Taichi on par with the majority of the AIB 5700 XT graphics cards that we've tested. So, what to make of the Asrock RX 5700 XT Taichi OC Plus? Well, if it had been the first AIB 5700 XT that I'd tested, that was actually the Evoke OC, funnily enough, but if it had been the first, I think I would be quite impressed with it. Not blown away, but compared to the AMD reference model, it is a big improvement. But now I have looked at, it's been over a dozen models, I'm pretty sure, and that's included the likes of Power Color's Red Devil, Sapphire's Nitro Plus, and most impressive of them all, and most recently, apart from this guy, has been MSI's Gaming X model. Has to be said, compared to those models, the Taichi is a bit lacking. I feel it is a bit more competitive using the silent BIOS, and while it does stack up better in that mode, it still does lose out to the models just mentioned. Of course, most will use it in the out-of-the-box configuration, and while it is very fast, it's also rather hot and makes a bit of noise. Asrock's clearly gone for chart-topping performance here with a Vin Diesel type mentality. Doesn't matter if you win by 1 FPS or 100, winning's winning. Unfortunately for Asrock, we decided to focus quite heavily on thermals, noise, and power for our 5700 XT reviews, and this is because we'd much rather have a quiet 5700 XT than one that's 2 to 3 FPS faster. I'd also rather board makers spent time optimizing their configuration for maximum efficiency. That way I get the perfect balance out of the box, and then if I want to choose to screw up all their hard work for a few extra frames, I can. The biggest issue with the Taichi OC Plus right now is the price. Currently it is selling for $480 US, and that is the official MSRP set by Asrock. And quite frankly, that is just way too much for a Radeon RX 5700 XT graphics card. Don't care how good it is, it's just too much. As much as I really like the 5700 XT, I fully recognize that you can't really price them too much over AMD's $400 MSRP. I think it's fair to say once you venture beyond $450, the GeForce RTX 2070 Super is hands down the better option. And finally, for those of you who may be watching this video in the future, a future where the Taichi OC Plus may cost significantly less than it does right now, then sure, it may be worth buying, but it will have to be at least $20 to $30 cheaper than the options I spoke of from Sapphire, Power Color, and MSI. It's a bit like XFX's Thick 2, I think. It's really a $420 US graphics card in today's market, and really it's going to be hard to charge much more than that. So unfortunately, that's pretty much the situation based on the performance we saw. So that's going to do it for our comments on the Asrock Taichi OC Plus. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. If you want to support the channel more directly and get some cool merch in the process. You can buy a hoodie. We also have a cup, a mug. So that's that. And yeah, just go check out the merch store. Links in the video description. You can also join us on Patreon, get access to our exclusive Discord chat, monthly live stream, Q&As, all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool as well. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.